know too many predominantly backend developers who think of CSS as kind of a black box. They have all these projects they'd like to launch, but they always need somebody on the front end to help them write the CSS. The fortunate thing is today, it's easier than ever to construct a layout. So in this video, as well as those that follow it, I'll show you just how easy it has become. I'm not here to show you cutting edge things that you can't even really use in a browser today, and I'm also not here to show you how a margin or a padding works. The assumption is you have the basics, you know how to create a heading, how to style it, but in terms of constructing a layout, you'd rather somebody else do it. Okay, I'm going to help you with that. So we'll begin with this standard navigation bar. I'll show you how to mentally think of the structure, write it up, and then we'll handle the CSS. Now, if we switch over to Sublime, I have a Laravel project, but there's really no need for it. This could be a static site as well. So you'll see I have an empty page here. I'm importing a app.css file. The only thing I've done is set a font family that I'm pulling in through Google Fonts. And on that note, Google Fonts is a good resource for you. They're all entirely free. Most of the trending ones are of good quality, and they will load quickly. Here, I'm using Open Sans. All right, so at the moment, if we load our site in the browser, of course it's blank, and that's because we have nothing on the page. All right, let's get to work. So to begin with the HTML, well, I immediately know I have a navigation area, right? This could be nav, this could be header, it's really whatever you want to call it. So let's just take it step by step. Now, immediately I see two sections here. So I have a section up here, and I have a section down here. So instantly I'm going to think to myself, all right, well, I'm going to have two different divs there. Okay, so to start, we're going to have the logo, and usually that will be an anchor tag. I'm going to ignore that for now, but yeah, you might want to make that an anchor. Next, way over here, we have a link to sign in. So let's add that as well. All right, so notice I'm not thinking of any CSS at the moment. I'm just thinking of the structure. So I have my header, I have this top section here, and now down here, I will have my nav. So with that in mind, why don't we rename this to nav? All right, so within it, we have catalog, series, podcast, and discussions, just like Laracast. All right, catalog, and we'll duplicate this a handful of times. All right, series, podcast, and discussions, and that should be it. Okay, so I think that's our full structure. Our header, then two sections with a logo and a sign-in link. We have that done. And then we have a navigation section below with 4 links that you see here. So now if I come back and we give this a refresh, there's what we get. Especially if you don't work with CSS as much, I don't blame you. This ends up being very intimidating because you think, well, I don't even know where to begin. All right, let's begin with the obvious, this background color. Let's select this right here, and you'll see we have a gradient. Now, if we switch back, I might need to target this directly. So if I will have more than one header on the page, which is very likely, a header doesn't just refer to the page header. It can refer to the header of a card and things like that. Let's keep it simple for now, but that's something you should think about. Okay, so header, and I'll paste in our background image. Here, I want a linear gradient that goes from left to right, from this color to that color. All right, so if we come back and give that a refresh, there we go. Now we see it. However, we're seeing all this spacing around it, and that's because by default, browsers are going to add a certain amount of default styling. So if we click on the body tag, and by the way, if you're not familiar with Chrome DevTools, I can hit Shift-Command-C, or on any section, I can right-click and choose Inspect. Now, if I'm looking at my body tag here, I can click on Computed, and this will show me an overlay of all the margin, border, padding, and dimensions. So immediately you can see all around we have 8 pixels of margin. And where does that come from? It is a default. So if we were to come here and override it and just say margin is 0, you'll see that the left and right are reduced. All right, what else? Why do we still see some space at the top? And that's because a heading is going to have some margin at the top. And notice, if you're ever trying to explain where space is coming from, hover over it in Chrome DevTools. So you'll see right here, oh, the H1 is taking up all this space. So I will click on that, go to Computed here, and again, I can see that there is some default margin. That's why the font is bold, even though I didn't specify it. That's why these links are blue with underlines. Those are default stylings provided by the browser. So once again, if I were to just say on this element, 0 out the margin, now you can see that bumps up. Now, as it turns out, this can often be fairly annoying. You're frequently fighting the default styling that's provided by the browser. So this is where reset style sheets come into play. And you have two different kinds. One will completely reset all default browser styling, so you're starting from scratch. Another type, which is very popular, is called normalize.css. And this does most of what you would naturally want. It's going to keep basic styling that most sites will share, but it will normalize the layout and the styling from browser to browser. Okay, so if we were to try this out, of course, you can pull this in through npm, whatever you want. For now, though, let's just copy it into our project. Okay, so we could throw it in here, or for now, why don't we create a link that goes to normalize.css. But yes, later you can learn about build tools where you can merge these to reduce the number of HTTP requests you make. Next, for your links, you'll often see this in your projects. Type equals text/CSS. It's superfluous. You don't need it. It's already the default. So keep it simple. All right, so I'm going to create public CSS normalize.css and paste this in. Okay, so now if we were to come back, remember that we have set some overrides here that have not been saved. So this is how it currently looks. But let's give it a refresh to pull in the normalized changes. And now you'll see it did just do the basics. It did reset some of those margins. And if we had a larger site, you would see some more changes that were made. Okay, so let's reset this heading here. I'm going to go to CSS app.css. And again, I'm being very, very generic here. So the H1 within the header should have no margin top. And we'll give that a refresh. Okay, but now over here, you can see we have a couple things. One, the text is centered here. And that's fairly standard, right? We refer to this as a container. So let's do that. Let's come back here and we'll say, all right, well, this whole header, it's container. Now we could wrap it within a div called container, or why don't we just put it on the header here? So we'll call it container and then style it here. Typically for a container, there will be a maximum width of 1200 pixels. So this says, for our container, the maximum width it can be is 1200 pixels, which in this case takes up most of it because I'm on a low resolution. Let's give it a refresh, and now you can see it cuts off exactly at 1200 pixels. But now, like this, I want everything centered, but we still have all of the text to the left. Okay, let's come back and set a margin of 0 on the top and bottom, and auto on the left and right. When we write auto, it's our way of saying, okay, on the left, I want the exact amount of margin as there is on the right. And the only way to accomplish that is to perfectly center it, as you see here. But now we have a new problem. The background color is part of that container. And this is one of those glaring issues that often confuses people. You want this centered, but you have a background image, and you don't want the background image to be clipped off. Okay, so it sounds like we need to apply the background image before the container. Let's try that. We'll come back here, and now rather than applying the container to the header, I'm going to do it within here, like so. So we're going to add another wrapper, and then re-indent. Okay, so now if I come back and give it a refresh, we applied the background color to the header where there is no maximum width. However, within here, we have a container, so now everything is limited to that. And you'll see, if we set a background color of gray, you can see it's perfectly centered. Okay, next, what do we see? Well, we have two sections. We have the logo, and then we have a sign-in link, and they're on the far left and on the far right. Now, the way we used to do this is through floats. And if you're familiar with that, if you go back that far, it was horrible. You always ended up in situations where your floats would break, or in certain browsers, old IE, you would have double margin bugs that would break everything. It was a bit of a nightmare. But now we have something called Flexbox, the Flexbox module, and it makes everything infinitely easier. Let me show you. We'll give this a refresh. So remember, we have one section that wraps these two, and another section below that wraps those links. Let's focus on the one up top. I'm going to set a display of flex. Now, whenever you set a display of flex, by default, it's going to put everything left to right, or inline. It's not really the best term, but it's an easy way to think of it. It doesn't have to be that way. You could set a flex direction of column, and now once again, it's going to go vertically. But by default, it's going to be displayed as a row. Do not underestimate how incredibly powerful this is. You will find uses for Flexbox everywhere. It's the thing I use most when I'm writing CSS. I use it to align links and icons. I'm going to use it for navigation. I can use it for layout. You can use it for anything. It's the most powerful addition to CSS in the last decade. Okay, so we see here we have a display of flex, a flex direction of row, but that's already the default, so ignore that for now. However, I still want this sign-in link way over here. So we can use a new property called justify contents. How do we want to justify it? And when you're first learning, hit the down arrow and just cycle through them. So center will center them within their container. Flex end will flex everything to the very end of the row. Flex start, of course, is doing the left, or the start of the container. Now, I like these right here, space around. This is our way of saying, well, let's fill this out. Space around means we want the same amount of space around each of them, as you see there and there. Now, there's another one called space between, and this will be what we want. This means, okay, the same amount of space between them, and effectively it'll push this one to the far left and this one to the right of the container. And once again, if I set a background color of gray, you'll see right there at the end. All right, so all we did was set a display of flex. Look, this is what we had before. Very confusing. We set a display of flex, we justify the contents, and we're starting to get a layout here. Okay, so let's begin. Now, later in this series, I'm going to show you how to use a tool called Tailwind to make the CSS so much easier to prep. But for now, we're going to create traditional classes. So what do we want to call this? Whatever you want. You could say header top, that's fine. In this series, we'll talk about a number of ways to name and structure things. Okay, but this is most common, I'd say. So we'll have our header top, and we've now decided we want to display a flex and justify the content with space between. All right, let's come back and give that a refresh. And there we go. Next, what about this section down here? Okay, well, it looks like these links also have the same amount of space between, and they are centered within their container. Okay, let's give that a shot. I'll click this link to select. Let me select this section here. There's our nav. And let's just try to do a display of flex again. But now we're going to use justify content. And this time we learned about center. So let's do center. And now they're centered within the area. However, you'll notice there's now no space between the links. So we can either set a bit of margin between them. We could set a width for each one. It's whatever you want to do. Let's try this. I'll select an anchor tag, and I'm going to click this plus symbol, and this will allow me to create a new selector. Why don't we say nav A, and we'll set padding on the left of 10 pixels and padding on the right of 10 pixels. Okay, now you have a little more spacing there, and that's what we want. Okay, so we'll come back here. Nav. And notice, by the way, already we're just focusing on the navigation area, but we're starting to write a lot of CSS. And you can imagine a year from now, this is going to be a little confusing to come back to. So we'll discuss a number of ways to structure things to make it somewhat bearable to maintain and return to your CSS. Okay, so for our nav anchor tags, we could even say greater than A. And what this says is I want to style all anchor tags that are direct children of the navigation. So here we could say padding left of 10 pixels and then the same for the right. Next, we decided that nav, once again, will have a display of flex and a justify content of center. So now if we come back and give this a refresh, yeah, you can see what we had initially. Kind of daunting, right? But we just took it step by step, not too much here. And we're starting to reproduce the layout from here. Okay, but now you'll notice there's a good bit of spacing there, and here we have none. So let's try it out. In our header, let's set padding all around of maybe 20 pixels, or we could even use M's. Maybe something like that. 1 M on the top and bottom, and 2 M's worth on the left and right. Something along those lines. Let's come back up to our header, and we'll add that, and maybe how about 1.5 M's on the top and bottom, and 2 M's on the left and right. And we'll give that a refresh. There we go. Next, our links, of course, are not correct. So why don't we do some base styling for links? Text decoration is none. That will remove the underline by default. Next, the color, let's just set it to a black. Next, when you hover over a link, we will set some text decoration. All right, refresh, and that's what we get. We can hover over these now, and it functions basically the way you'd expect. All right, if we come back, though, they're in uppercase, and the color is actually dependent upon the background color. All right, let's see if we can implement that. To begin, we'll say text transform uppercase. Okay, Now you don't have to update your anchor tags. You can do it directly with CSS. But what about the color? Notice it's a shade of the background color. Here's one thing you can do. You can set the color. Well, of course, we can control it however we want, but we could also set it to a variant of the background color. So if we use RGBA, red, green, blue, alpha, so for example, if we set 255, 255, 255, that's of course going to be white. If you've ever used Photoshop, this will be familiar. However, the fourth parameter is going to be the alpha, or the opacity. So 1 will be 100%, 0 will be, well, it's invisible. If we do about half, you'll notice we can set the color to a variant of the color it's on top of. So we're basically saying make the color white, but 50% opacity. So we're seeing some of the background come through. So if we were to come back to our header here, and I set a background color of blue, background color of blue, well, the text is now going to be a shade of blue, or green, or yellow. That's horrible, or black. You get the idea. Okay, so let's grab some of our styling, switch back to our nav, and paste those in. All right, so if we come back and give this a refresh, we're getting there. Next, our logo, we can do some slight tweaking there. Font size of 1.6 ems. Come back, refresh. Yep, we're getting there. Now, the link up here, once again, that's bold, which means we could maybe say header top, and we'll just set a default to bold, because it sounds like everything up there will be bold, and then also white, which means I can remove this. All right, come back and give that a refresh. That's all looking good, but once again, why is this black? Well, that's because, yes, it's inheriting from a color of white. Right here, white. However, anchor tags will always have some default styling right here. So that's taking precedence. Now, if you ever want to say, well, I want you to inherit your color from a parent rather than deferring to what you currently have, you could always say color, inherit. So now it's going to inherit from its closest parent. So if I set this to red, it's inheriting that color. So let's try that. Within our header top, we'll try it again. Header top A, color is inherit. Come back, give this a refresh, and we're definitely getting there. So now at this point, we can just do some basic styling. For example, maybe the heading top should have a little space below, some breathing room. So we're going to push that down. All right, let's implement that. And yeah, you'll see often you play around in the browser, you figure out what you need, how it's going to look, and then once you're set in stone, you can copy this and paste it in. Or there's even ways you can structure things so that as you edit a file here, it's immediately reflected in the underlying source code. But we're not interested in that for now. All right, so I think we're fairly close to what we had originally. We might want to do a few things such as, right here, add a little more padding to the left and right, but this is what tweaking is for. The main thing I want you to notice is how quickly we went from an overwhelming, even as simple as it is, it's still overwhelming. I don't even know where to begin. And it turns out where you begin is at the beginning, the first thing you see. All right, well, it sounds like there's a background color. All right, next, it sounds like there's two sections. So let's get that on the left and right. All right, sounds like there's another section that's centered with a little spacing. So let's center it. And then you iterate element by element. Okay, so we still have so much more to talk about. Responsive design, mobile-first design, how we can maybe write CSS a bit more cleanly. This is just a navigation bar, and it's already, I'd say, a little overwhelming. So many magic numbers. You can imagine over the life cycle of a project. You could end up with sections with padding of 100 different values and consistencies. These are all things to think about. But again, the goal is you mentally visualize the structure in your head, you write it out, and then you take it step by step. And here's what we get.